Okay. Welcome back, everyone, to the Academics in Government events. I see the participants are starting to join. This is panel number 2. We are speaking with market regulators and standard setters. So we've used the word government liberally. And we have one federal agency, 2 self-regulatory organizations, and 1 standard setter. This panel is going to operate much like the last panel, and speaking to 4 market regulators about the role of academics, PhD trained accountants and economists at their particular institutions. And we'll start with a round of questions, introductions of each organizations, and we want to hear your questions. If you have a question for any of the panelists, please use the Q&A chat function, Q&A green answer function. We also have the chat function open. If you want to say hello world or talk to your fellow panelists or add commentary, you can do that. We won't necessarily be using that to monitor for questions, but that's available to you as well. All right, so let me quickly introduce our panelists. We have Chia Becker, who is the Deputy Chief Economist of the Securities and Exchange Commission, Shannon Garavaglia, who is a visiting scholar at the Fasb, Nayantara Hensel, who is the Chief Economist of the PCAOB, and Lori Walsh, the Deputy Chief Economist at FINRA. And I'd like to start by just asking each of the panelists to introduce themselves, their role in their organization, and describe at a high level what PhD trained accountants and economists do in their organization, particularly from the perspective of an academic, maybe a job market candidate, or somebody looking for a sabbatical or a visiting position or a research collaboration, in a way they can understand what your organizations do. So Chia, we'll start with you.
Thanks, Scott. Before I get started, I just have to say these remarks reflect solely my personal views and do not necessarily reflect the views of the Securities and Exchange Commission, the individual members of the commission, or its staff. And if anyway, so I'm going to start by talking a little bit about myself, my job. I'll talk then about my job and also what economists do at the SEC. So just about me, I've been at the SEC for over 12 years now. I joined the SEC from a small litigation economics firm called Chicago Partners, but I was previously a principal at Deloitte. I got my PhD in finance from the University of Chicago, and my undergrad degree was in psychology from Yale University. So I'll talk now a little bit about my job. And I will say about my job that part of it is administrative. I supervise several managers in the Division of Economic and Risk Analysis at the Securities and Exchange Commission. My supervisees include the Office of Data Science and Innovation and also the Office of Litigation Economics. So, like I said, part of my job is administrative, but the other part of my job involves economics, and that's the part that I consider to be a little bit more fun. I've worked on specific policy issues that I find particularly interesting and motivating, as well as enforcement cases. And the stuff that I'm doing is, it's a lot like applied, it is a lot like applied research. When I have encountered professors who come from academia to the government, many of them tell me that they're surprised at how much the job is not different from what they did in academia. So to talk to you a little bit about what economists do at the SEC, I like to use an analogy from grad school. So when I was in grad school, some of my classmates were completely brilliant at writing their dissertations and doing research. And they just loved it. That was honestly never me. I didn't just feel deeply inspired by my own ideas, but I loved the first half of my PhD program where I was studying for exams and working on problem sets and working together with my classmates in a study group. And one of the things I loved about that was that my classmates were great about working in study groups together. So we did our homework on our own, and we only got together to compare results. We didn't try to solve the problem concurrently. We did our independent thinking, and then we got together. So that experience of working to solve economic problems together is a lot like what it's like to work for the SEC. I think we're always working on problems that somebody else came up with, but the problems are extremely interesting, and we're working on teams, and they often make a difference in the world. And we're working with a bunch of attorneys in almost every case, and the attorneys care deeply about the results of our analysis. And one last thing about sort of what economists do at the SEC, if you picture us sort of sitting in rooms thinking about, I'm trying to convey the idea that we aren't sitting in our offices thinking big thoughts about the economy on our own and working on our own independent research projects, because that's for the most part not what's happening. Instead, what we're doing is we're actively engaging with a whole bunch of other people to talk about the economic portion of what the SEC is actually doing. And with that, I'll turn it over to the next person.
Okay, Chia, thanks. And we'll come back and ask some questions more specific about the SEC and the next round. But let's go to Shannon. Now, Shannon, you're a little bit different than the other panelists here. You are actually a visiting scholar at the Fasb. You're a recent graduate from the University of Texas. Can you answer the question, from your perspective in that capacity?
Yeah, so I'll talk first a little bit about just kind of what the academic fellow at the Fasb does, and then I'll talk about why I was drawn to that opportunity. And I think why I was drawn to it will kind of apply across the board to any of the opportunities you hear about today. So at the Fasb, there's another big difference is there's only one academic fellow at any given time at the Financial Accounting Standards Board. And what they do is kind of a lot of things. You wear a lot of hats. So the big role is being the academic liaison, and that goes in both directions. So you take research that's out there and you bring it to the project teams and you synthesize it and give it to them in a way that they can actually then turn and use that in their analysis. And then at the same time, you're out there trying to educate people in academia about what kind of research would be helpful in the standard setting process. And so it's about trying to kind of drum up business and find people who are interested in working on standard setting topics, but maybe don't know what that means, and educating them about what the Fasb is working on, what types of questions are relevant to them. I think a lot of people see changes in accounting standards as a good shock to use for various questions, but those questions aren't always directly relevant to what the Fasb is thinking about in terms of evaluating the efficiency and effectiveness of the standard. And so a huge part of what I do is try to educate academics about the types of questions that are interesting and relevant to the standard setting process. And then last, the academic fellow also gets to work on project teams. And so that's fun because you're serving just like any other staff member would. They're curious in how you think about things. And it's really fun because there's a practice fellows. So those are Big Four managers, soon to be partners. And so they bring a ton of technical accounting skills to the picture, but they're not as much about thinking about things conceptually. And that's where we as academics really excel, as we think about things from this big picture. Conceptually, what is the right thing to do? Conceptually, what might the market benefit from knowing? And so we bring that new and different perspective to these project teams and help them as they go through their analysis and make recommendations to the board. In terms of why I chose this opportunity, we are often criticized in academia for doing research that doesn't have practical implications. And my true belief is that a lot of that comes from just not knowing what research would have practical implications. We don't have a good understanding of what are the things that standard setters and regulators are thinking about, what do they need evidence about. And so I saw this as an awesome opportunity to go out there and kind of see what's happening behind the scenes and to educate myself. And I think it's going to have long impacts on both my research and my teaching, in terms of now I know how to approach teaching better and to guide students who are not all going to be PhDs. A lot of them are going to go out and work in accounting in the real world. So they need to understand, how do regulators and standard setters think about these things? That's going to be important in their jobs. But then it also informs my research, and it helps me to motivate my research questions and answer that ever important question of, why is your particular research important? I can say it contributes to standard setters, and I don't just make that blanket statement. I have something substantive to say, like, I know standard setters care about this particular issue and they're thinking about this in this way, and therefore my research is relevant to them. And so I'm learning so much on both sides of the spectrum that I think are going to have amazing downstream consequences for the rest of my career.
Thank you, Shannon. That was a great introduction. Let's move to Nayantara. Can you explain your role at the Public Company Accounting and Oversight Board and the role of PhDs there?
Well, thank you, Scott. So the PCAOB is a nonprofit organization that was established by Congress under the Sarbanes-Oxley Act of 2002 to basically help in preventing the next Enron. And our role is to oversee the audits of public companies in order to protect investors and the public interest by trying to promote informative, accurate, and independent audit reports. The SEC has oversight authority over us, and our regulatory agency has a number of offices and divisions which deal with inspections, enforcement, legal issues, international affairs, and so on. And I should note before I go any further that the views only reflect my views and not necessarily the views of the board, any board member, or the staff at PCAOB. I joined PCAOB in June of 2019 as the chief economist for PCAOB and the director of the Office of Economic and Risk Analysis, which has about 49 full-time employees and up to 30 interns. I've been back and forth from academia over the years, and I've really appreciated the insights from both the academic and non-academic world in terms of understanding how research can be made relevant, and also in interpreting the stories that data tells us. I previously served as chief economist for the Department of the Navy for a number of years. I headed the economic research group at the Federal Housing Finance Agency, which is the regulator and conservator for Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. I served as full professor at the Eisenhower School of Public Policy, where I headed the Defense Resourcing Program. And I also taught at the Stern School of Business at NYU, and also at the Naval Postgraduate School, where I headed the MBA program in finance. Now, my office in PCAOB is the primary location for the PhD-trained economists and accountants. And our teams undertake a variety of things. We undertake cost-benefit analyses for proposed regulations issued by PCAOB, we call them standards. We develop reviews of whether the regulation has met its objectives and provide an evaluation of its performance after it's been out for a while. We call those post-implementation reviews, or PIRs, and these can have much more quantitative analyses. We support the inspections division in assisting them with finding risky industries and companies whose audits could be inspected, and this requires a lot of data usage and econometric modeling. We, of course, support other offices and divisions in various ways. And then we undertake a lot of research projects on audit quality, audit expectations that are linked to the PCAOB strategic plan. And finally, and we'll probably talk more about this later, we develop an annual conference which combines academic research with the work of PCAOB and the perspectives of our board members. We have an external seminar series for academics to present their related research to our group. And we also have an academic fellowship program that provides opportunities for academics to spend 1 or 2 years with us, working in research that they'd like to do and which our board approves, and also providing a lot of valuable academic lenses to our projects.
Great. Thanks, Nayantara. And before we move to Lori, I'll just say a couple questions are coming in. Go ahead and keep asking them, and we'll batch them and address them after we get through these introductions. So Lori, all yours.
Great, thank you, Scott. Good morning, everybody. I'm Lori Walsh. I am currently the Deputy Chief Economist at FINRA. I graduated from Penn State and went straight to work at the SEC. Similar to Chia, I was not super excited about just kind of my own ideas, but really wanting to, to do research that, that I knew would make an impact. So I was at the SEC for 17 years. 10 years were with the Economists in what is now DERA. Overlapped with CHIA for a few of those years, which was great. And then for the last 7 years, I was in the Division of Enforcement at the SEC and really kind of helped them design and roll out a centralized, disciplined analytical capability, analytics capability that they could use for investigations. It was something they hadn't really done much of. It was kind of sporadic. And so I created the Center for Risk and Quantitative Analytics and Enforcement. In 2017, I came to FINRA as the Deputy Chief Economist and help kind of expand the scope of the things that we work on at FINRA, the economists work on at FINRA, to include, enforcement examination work, as well as work with our technology team. But now let me jump over to the Office of the Chief Economist and what we do, what role the economists play in our work and in FINRA's mission. So the office started in 2013. Jonathan Scobin was the first and is current chief economist at FINRA. The main priority of our office is to evaluate, understand, estimate the economic impacts of potential policy changes. We also do retrospective reviews. We go back to existing rules and understand, are they still working? Did they have the benefits that we anticipated, et cetera? But the really interesting thing about FINRA is we have very close access to the industry. We can, with a little coordination, call up, large broker dealers, any broker dealer, small broker dealer, and ask them, how does this process work? How do you guys really, what do you think about whenever you do this or do that? That helps us significantly in understanding the economic impacts of our role, but it also helps us in our research, which is kind of the second major area of focus for OCE. We do a fair amount of policy research. It's got to obviously be relevant to FINRA and to the industry, but we spend a fair amount of time on anything from white papers to publishing in top finance journals. Our research and the purpose of the research is to really help FINRA, help the industry, help academia better understand the mechanics of the markets, of behaviors of participants in the markets. And because we have access to data that in certain cases no one else does, we're really able to dig in and provide some pretty deep insights. And the economists do get time to work on research. It depends a little bit on, what's on your plate for rulemaking, but, some of our economists get, for several months, we'll get almost entirely time for research, and others will, be almost entirely in rulemaking, but then we try to, make sure that they get shielded and get some time for research as well. And then the last major area that that our economists focus on is kind of the additional economic or data analysis support for FINRA. We serve a role similar to CHIA's group in that we help support not nearly as robust a process as CHIA has set up at the SEC, but we help with litigation economics and a little bit on the investigative side as well. We work with technology in developing advanced analytics to use data to identify, risks, behaviors, et cetera. Almost all of the PhD economists are in OCE. We do have a couple spread throughout FINRA. There's the Office of Investor Education that, works with PhDs on more of the consumer behavioral finance issues. And then in some of our advanced analytics teams in the market supervision and market regulation and member supervision space. Oh, I should say, FINRA is kind of divided into two parts. It is, we oversee the broker-dealer industry, essentially, by delegated authority from the SEC. And that includes both a member, what we call member conduct side, how broker-dealers are executing their duties, keeping their firms safe from systemic risks, et cetera. Understanding, customer complaints and the arbitration process. And then we also have the market side where we identify potential bad behavior, non-competitive, anti-competitive practices, et cetera, in the transactions in the securities market. And so that's what we do.
Great, thanks, Lori. And we have a question here that I want to unpack a little bit, an audience question to unpack a little bit across your organizations. And it asks, can you talk about the typical institutional arrangements with outside academics? Will they remain a university employee or become full-time employees of your organization if they come? And what I'd like for you to each do is talk about, in general, who are you recruiting for? How many economists or accountants are you looking for on the market this year in a typical year? What sort of positions do they slot into? Visitors, permanent? And maybe Lori, if we can, start with you and go in reverse. Do you want to take first crack at that?
Sure. So the Office of the Chief Economist, we have 11 PhD financial economists and 6 or so research analysts. They're as permanent full-time employees. We also have a PhD student who works with us half-time. We have student externs who are unpaid, but get access to our data under our contracts, et cetera. And we oversee their work and they, do a little bit of work for us. I would say there's 2 primary ways for academics to work with FINRA, non-public FINRA data. One is, this one's probably a little less appetizing, but fairly straightforward and somewhat easy, is co-authoring with an economist at FINRA. And so we don't have to set up any special contracts or anything, but if you co-author with somebody at FINRA, you can't see the data yourself, but you can, the FINRA economist will conduct all the analyses for the paper and then provide the analysis, provide the analysis to the co-authors. Another way that you can work with FINRA, we have in the past done occasionally like a secondee type of arrangement where we have an academic come in for 4 or 5 months. We set up an NDA program with them. We would not pay them, but they would have access to our data. They can talk to anybody in FINRA. They're just like a FINRA employee otherwise. And then we have some arrangements where we can allow that individual to continue to work with FINRA data on the research that they started after the sabbatical or visit is over. We also work with academics directly. We have 5 academic contractors on staff part-time. They tend to be tenured professors, and we go to them when we need specialized expertise in an area.
Okay, so you have permanent staff, you have co-authoring academics, you do set up secondees, or have in the past, where you set up a non-disclosure agreement and they might spend a small period of time there to begin. And then you also work with some senior leaders from academia who are on contract.
Yes, yeah. Oh, I will add one thing. We are expanding the office and looking for economists to hire primarily in the market structure space, but also more generally, we tend not to hire rookies just because they usually you need a little bit more experience to do the kind of work that we do. But, you know, we haven't yet, but doesn't say we wouldn't.
Okay, so you target more seasoned staff when you look
Yep.
for permanent staff. Okay.
Yep.
Nayantara, do you want to follow, like, how many people are in your organization that have PhDs? How do they come in? Where do you recruit from? How do they fit in?
Okay, well, as I mentioned, our office has the highest number of PhD trained staff within PCAOB. Our office has about 49 full-time employees and about 30 interns. The interns come from both undergraduate schools and do it part-time, and they also come from graduate schools as well. About half of our office's staff have PhDs, so we're in the 20s. We generally look for 2 to 3 permanent staff and 2 to 3 fellows every year. And our office tends to look for individuals with strong skill sets in economics and accounting, significant understanding of statistical and econometric modeling, interest in working with and extracting data, and of course, excellent writing and communication skills. So a strong interest in the desire, though, to support the public, including investors, by understanding and evaluating the work tends to be key. But, our staff works on research directly linked to our projects, which often involves white papers and policy analyses, like cost-benefit analyses for potential regulations, evaluations of the regulations after they've been out for a while, analyses regarding risks of industries and companies, projects that are linked to the PCAOB strategic plan. So this involves usage of both public data, external sources, data by subscriptions, and also non-public data, which requires significant review and evaluation in determining whether we can actually put that non-public data out in public reports. But our research is necessary for our projects, and it can evolve into research papers that have to be reviewed by our group and our legal division and related offices and divisions in the board. But our staff has published in academic journals. We have co-authored with fellows whose work plan was approved by our board. And, for our staff, the time dedicated to primary research is just dependent on the linkage with actual projects and also the workload as determined by the supervisors. And, research is rewarded and recognized, especially if it's key in supporting the work in PCAOB projects. And in that case, it really impacts career enhancement. In terms of the fellows that I talked about 65% of their time tends to be spent on PCAOB projects with staff members. About 35% of it is spent on their research projects, which have to be approved by the board. So that's important. Basically, we sort of work with them as we go along in the whole the research project arena for both the fellows and for our staff.
So thank you for that. And you touched on some things about research that we'll revisit in just a second. So let's go to Chia for a moment. Can you describe how big DERA is, how many accountants and economists you have? And in particular, when you're recruiting, can you describe who you're looking for, what levels, and maybe describe the IPA agreement that you have with visiting academics?
Sure, absolutely, thanks. So the Division of Economic and Risk Analysis at the SEC is about 150 people. And of that, we've got about 60 to 70 PhD economists. This year, we're looking to hire in 2 different ways. Scott mentioned the IPAs. Those are professors who remain employees of their universities, and they come to visit the SEC for most likely 1 year, and they can work across a variety of different areas. So in order to be hired into that kind of a position, you need to have an academic job. And of course, it's a competitive job. We're looking for people who have strong backgrounds, but because we cover a wide variety of topics in finance, we go from microstructure to corporate finance, to investment management, to institutional investors. and intermediaries. We cover such a wide spectrum in finance that I don't want to be too specific. And we actually also look for people in economics and accounting. So it's a pretty broad range. In addition, sorry, go ahead.
So you said both, you recruit for both accounting and economics or financial economics, and they all serve as economists, so to speak, in terms of their job function. You have different background. And do you also have non-accountants or economists? Do you ever hire mathematicians or, physics majors or other disciplines?
We absolutely do. So if you use your math skills and you subtract 60 to 70 from 150, you will notice, I know everybody on this call has the math skills to do that. You'll know that there are lots of other kinds of people that we hire, including physicists and mathematicians and statisticians, because the division is doing a wide range of things across lots of different topic areas. We also are looking this year for term economic fellows. Those are term employees. So we hire you for 2 years, and that position can be extended for up to 4 years. And we're looking for about 4 or 5 people. So those people would become employees of the agency, and they, right. So, and both of those ads are up right now on SSRN, if anybody is interested.
And Shia, if a question came in, and it's applicable to everybody too, are there specific skills that you're looking for beyond just your major?
We are looking for communication skills, especially writing skills, and also talking skills and listening skills. So writing, talking, and listening are huge for us.
And I'm assuming that's across the board for everybody on the panel. I see some nods. Some of you already touched on research at your organizations. I want to dig in a little bit deeper there. And Shannon, let's go to you. There is a question that asked, what's FASB's policy on publications based on research done by academic fellows and staff? And just more broadly, can you describe the role of academic research and how the FASB uses it and how it influences? We'll go from there.
Yeah, so the one thing I want to add really quick to the skills that are important, I think one big thing is the ability to communicate about research to a non-PhD trained person. I think it's easy to get bogged down in talking about the complex econometrics in terms of the limitations of your paper, but it's harder sometimes to explain how those limitations might translate to someone who's not familiar with those things. But it's super important in terms of what I find myself doing on a regular basis is saying, here's what this research says, but it really can only be applied in this setting. And here's how that might influence other conclusions that we want to make. And so I think that's a really important skill to have as well. In terms of publishing research while you're at the FASB, again, I think this is kind of a unique one because it is a 1-year position only. And we all know research projects tend to go on for much longer than 1 year. So they don't discourage or disallow you from publishing your own research. If anything, they encourage you to continue working on any existing research projects and starting new research projects. But there's no clear guidance on, oh, we want you to do a research project on this specific thing and forcing you to do that. It's all kind of, they see this as one step along the long career that you're going to have, and they don't want to do anything that interferes with your ongoing career. So I think all of the past fellows would agree that we've come up with ideas that are related to things that we've seen or heard during our time there. And the FASB encourages us to do that. That's exactly what they want. They want more research that's relevant to them, but there's no restrictions on my ability to publish or anything like that. The only restrictions are if there's internal documents like board memos, I'm not allowed to then turn around and cite those board memos because those are not for public distribution, but they can inform my thinking as much as anything that I do there in my time does. I think there was maybe one, you wanted to know more about how the FASB uses research. So they use it in all kinds of different ways. So for projects that are independent where they're thinking about things, for example, right now, one of the projects that I'm working on has to do with goodwill. And so a huge discussion is, are we going to amortize? And if so, are we going to set a default period for amortization? And if so, what is that default period? And they are super interested in what academic research can inform us about this topic in terms of what does the market find useful, and what do we know about in the past when companies had the option to choose periods? How did they make those choices? What kinds of things went into those factors? And so they look to academic research for help there. On the flip side, they also look to academic research for help in the post-implementation review process. So after any standard is issued, they then do some sort of monitoring process to check and see, is the standard meeting the goals that it was set out to meet? And they hope that academic research can help inform them. I mean, a lot of the work that we're doing right now, for example, in the CECL post-implementation review, is solely just outreach. We're talking to preparers, we're talking to auditors, we're talking to users and finding how is the standard impacting their experience. But they would love large sample evidence that can tell them more about kind of what are the global impacts of this standard and how it might have changed things like lending rates. And so they really need academic research. They know that that's where they're going to get that large sample evidence that can help inform their evaluation of the efficiency and effectiveness of the standard. And I'll just put in a little plug here that we have a session at the upcoming Fasb meeting in January where we're going to give an update on all of the projects. And through some of that, we're going to provide some opportunities where the Fasb would really love to see additional research. And so that's a great opportunity. If you're interested in doing standard setting research, but don't know exactly what that might look like, then attend that Fasb session. It'll be virtual and you can hear a little bit more about the projects that they're working on and the kinds of questions that would really benefit the standard setting process.
Thanks, Shannon. And Nayantara, before we get to your answer, some questions have come in about the use of data, the type of data, unique non-public data. Can you integrate that into your answer? I know the PCAOB has access to inspections data and other unique data that the public doesn't have access to. In what way is that data used? Can it be used for journal publication? Whether or not it can, what is the approval process for research? What role does the board play in that? What discretion do staff have? These are lots of questions that some of the audience would like to learn more about.
Okay, well, that's great. You know, again, our research, both what we do when we do economic analyses for standards and when we do for post-implementation reviews and the work that we do that's linked to the PCAOB strategic plan, all of those require research. And those research can also develop much more into publishable papers. Now, when we use non-public data that, you know, requires significant review and evaluation, I think, in determining whether it can be presented in public report or in, you know, a published academic paper. And, you know, obviously my division has to approve it. It has to be run through legal. It has to be run through other divisions and offices. And it also has to be run through, at times, our board members. Because, you know, some of our non-public information is going to be coming from the audit firms. Data from the audit firms about, you know, what they're auditing. I mean, you know, what kind of workload do the partners have? You know, what's the staff turnover on a particular audit? So we have to be very careful what we actually put out there. And, you know, to the degree that to which the non-public data is aggregated, that certainly is something that is easier to consider by the legal group than, you know, actually going down for a particular company that is being audited and giving out those types of numbers. When the work comes out with public data that comes from, you know, databases that require subscriptions, you know, Bloomberg, S&P, things like that, or, you know, newspapers or things like that, that's obviously much less difficult, I think, to get through the process. But again, our staff has published in academic journals. We've co-authored in many cases with fellows. And again, those academic research papers do go through, you know, the approval process through my division, other related divisions, the legal group, the board members. So that's just generally sort of how it's done. But I think that what's been particularly valuable, both for the external fellows that join us for a year or two as full-time employees and for our staff, is just the stories that the data tells us. You know, there's a lot of really interesting things that you see both in public data and non-public data. And that's always very important as we try to, at least internally, if not externally, develop a good framework for audit firms and for investors. and for all committees.
Thank you. Chia, let's go to you next. I know from my time at the SEC, there was this mythological closet where there was all the proprietary data that you could see and use. And can you help explain whether or not that really is mythological, to what extent there is, how data are available to staff, and just in general, the review process by which research is done, who does it, and what say does the commission have, or what say or what discretion do economists have?
Sure. So that closet exists in the sense that there certainly is a lot of non-public and highly sensitive data at the SEC. We take our responsibility to safeguard that data super seriously. It's a huge public responsibility, and as a result, any research that gets done with using our non-public data in order to share that research outside the commission, we have to have a vote by the commission that decides whether or not it is a good idea to release that research. So it's a difficult, it's a challenging process, and it's not quick. Yeah.
Besides this non-public data, which requires 5 members of the board to vote for whether or not it goes out, it seems like that's a big friction. Can you talk about, aside from the proprietary data there, what sort of resources exist for staff to conduct research, both for the commission and for peer-reviewed academic journals?
Thanks. We have actually quite a lot of research sources. We've got excellent computing resources, and we subscribe to vast numbers of databases. So our data resources are absolutely extraordinary, I think, especially compared to almost any other university that I can think of. Our data resources are huge. And another thing that's good, that's supportive of research, is our seminar series, our visiting scholars. We bring in senior folks for a week at a time to advise our staff on their existing research projects. So, and we've been productive. So the division produces between, I haven't actually counted, but it's roughly between 6 and 12 papers a year that are published, and about as many working papers on an annual basis. So we are productive. That said, most staff don't have a ton of time to actually engage in research during working hours. They're busy.
So yeah. Working hours at a federal agency is 40 hours per week. So within the 40 hours per week, a lot of the time is agency directed. And then I'm assuming some economists spend time outside that 40 hours a week pursuing research programs. Is that a fair statement?
That's exactly right. And I think similar to what people do in academia, people are working beyond a 40-hour work week in order to get their papers done.
Okay. Lori, I know you already discussed a little bit about research collaboration with FINRA. Do you have anything to add about how that works?
Yeah, so first I'd like to add a little bit more information about the data, the non-public data that that we have. We've got, we've got all of the equity, all equity transactions, including, executing brokers, et cetera. We've got all transactions on fixed income securities, including broker identities. We've got, all over the counter equity transactions. We've got broker-dealer focus reports that are like financial statements for brokers, which is actually quite sensitive data because most broker-dealers are not publicly traded or as a sole entity. Usually they're either part of they're typically part of like a commercial bank or something like that. And we've got arbitration data, enforcement data, examination data, things like that. And I apologize, my cat just joined me. So we have a lot of really interesting internal non-public data that we do research on. We also periodically go out and ask for data. We ask for voluntarily from ATSs to, send us every single corporate bond transaction that went through their ATS for a particular period of time. And that allows us to do research as well. In terms of the process for vetting research, we do not have to have our board approve the research unless our CEO thinks it's necessary. So typically what we do is once we have gotten the paper internally vetted within OCE, we will send it to senior leaders across FINRA who have expertise in these areas to review it and give us feedback. We go to our CEO and have him review it and provide feedback and let us know if he's comfortable releasing it. And then we will make it public. We have papers on SSRN, we have papers on our website. I'm actually quite proud of this. Last year, we released a working paper that actually showed some not so great sides of the industry. And, we sent it to advisory committees that are made up of industry people. The authors, the economists, had lots of discussions with various individuals across the industry to make sure that we weren't, misconstruing anything. And fingers crossed, it's conditionally accepted to one of the top 3 finance journals, and hopefully that will get in. And so, it's not our favorite thing to do to publish research that, shines a not great light on the industry, but we do it. We have a precedent of doing it. As long as it is really well done research, we're willing to take the risk. And so, the vetting process is not incredibly burdensome in FINRA. It just takes time, and it takes, really high quality research to get through.
So it sounds like there's a fair bit of independence in the office of the chief economist, even on controversial issues. And even when those controversial issues being researched are based on proprietary data, not otherwise available to the public.
Yeah, as long as we aggregate the data to a sufficient level that it is not possible to identify any individual participant, we are, for the most part, free to publish with it.
Okay, so we have about 10 minutes left, and I want to turn to the relevance of economists and accountants at your organizations. But there is one comment here. An anonymous attendee said, "Do government institutions give priority to women, diverse employees, and staff during the hiring process for visiting and full-time jobs?" I'm going to answer for everybody that the answer is yes, and just point out that besides some one middle-aged white dude moderating this panel, I think you have a pretty interesting representation of senior leaders of these organizations that are not men. So kind of a nice artifact. I don't know if we would see something like this 10 years ago. But let's go to relevance to economists and accountants at your organizations. Can you describe a little bit about, for example, let's start with you, Nayantara. How do economists or accountants contribute to risk-based inspections, selection of audit firms, audit partners, preparers? And how do they get in front of the board? How important are they, and what attention do they get in these processes in terms of policy or supervision?
Oh no, our group is very important, particularly in assisting the inspections group in finding audits that can be inspected. We do a lot of econometric work in understanding some of the trends that we're seeing in various industries. And, for example, right now, which ones are more impacted by COVID versus others? And how, in turn, does that flow into the financial statements of various companies that are within those industries? Looking at things, goodwill, intangible assets, things like that. And so we do a fair bit of work with our inspections group in trying to come up with the audits of companies that our inspections team should inspect. And we do come up quite frequently before the board on things like that, as well as work with other offices and divisions on that.
Great. Shannon, let's move to you. I mean, you placed the University of Pittsburgh coming out of the University of Texas. You've taken a year to visit the Fasb. Can you just give us a flavor for how important or relevant you think you are at the Fasb, and are you happy with that?
Yeah, so I mean, it's ever evolving. So this is only the third year where the Fasb has really targeted people who are in my position. Historically, they had looked for people who were more senior, oftentimes tenured faculty to come and visit. And I think, I definitely feel very valued. At times, the pressure is almost a lot because you're the only academic there. And so they're really relying on you to be the person who identifies academic research and brings it to them and explains it to them. And I've joked with some of the past fellows, like sometimes it would be really nice if there was just one more of us so we could bounce ideas back and forth. I think there's a reason that academics often work in teams, because there's value in bouncing ideas off of each other and thinking about complex issues in different ways. The 100% values research. That's why they have created this role. That's why they're constantly trying to come up with new ways to engage with the academic community. They're interested in what kind of research is out there. And to Lori's point earlier about, they're not just interested in research that says that they're doing a good job. They're interested in any research that can inform what they're doing, especially when it comes to post-implementation review. They want to know what's going wrong with the standard and how can we fix it? How can we make it better for our stakeholders? And so that's been probably one of the best parts for me to see, is that they don't just value research that supports their opinion. They value any research that informs their process and makes the standards better. So yeah, I think research is absolutely valued. I feel very valued at the Fasb right now, and I know they will continue to value any postdoc fellow who comes in, any academics who have relevant research to share with them.
Great, thank you. Chia, let's go to you next. And in addition to answering the question of how relevant economists and accountants are, do they meet with senior leaders? Does the commission listen to them? What is their role in influencing policy? I'd like for you to integrate another question that was asked by the audience, which is, how is the election, the transition and turnover of leadership affect your division and economists? We're going through one right now. Is there an effect? If so, what is that? What is it?
Sure. So I'll echo what the other folks have said in indicating that economists, our opinions and our research, as well as accountants and the many other experts in my division, are very much valued and valued. As Shannon said, we're valued for our research, whether it supports the current direction that the commission is heading, or whether it goes in the opposite direction, because the information is incredibly valuable. So we're very much valued. And in terms of the transition, it's an exciting time to be at the commission. I don't think it makes economists any less valuable. The fact that we're having we're in a transition time. If anything, we're as busy as ever. Yeah.
Chia, can you describe the role of economists? If an economist is assigned a policy project or an enforcement matter, and that's part of their day-to-day activity, when they're done with that, or they've done their job or have a view, how does that get used? I mean, who do they meet with? Do they meet with people? And I mean, does the chairman ever ask them what they think?
So the great news is that the chairman does ask us what we think, as you know, and they actually, he will ask, and others within the agency ask not only at the beginning of the project, but they ask throughout. They'll ask sometimes on a weekly basis. They ask more often than we want to necessarily answer. We're very much engaged throughout.
What does that interaction look like? Through meetings, through conversations? Do economists and accountants meet with commissioners or the chairman or division leaders? Like, how does that work?
We have meetings, we share documents, and we talk to each other, yes.
All right, this is as much as we're going to get from Chia. Okay, so does anybody else have any comments about the government transition? Does that affect where you are in an SRO? Nayantara or Laura, do you have anything to add?
Well, I would say that one major difference in a government transition is that, you know, your main role in communication in government agencies is going to be in presenting projects to others within your government agency or externally, like, you know, other agencies, conferences, things like that, rather than teaching students. Although, again, you're teaching your colleagues and it's the other way around, but still it's not the same thing as teaching students. And also, sometimes your research papers may have more of an applied lens. You know, I got my bachelor's, master's, and PhD at Harvard more years ago than I'd like to admit, and I went straight through. When I went out into the external world, you know, I was very up on econometric modeling, on economic literature, but I just didn't have that broader lens. And so I think that, you know, I spent 15 years in federal service. I think that I learned a lot from that regarding the different lenses. And I think that if you're interested in going back and forth between the external environment and academia, I think you should continue attending and presenting at key conferences and seminars, and also developing publishable research, either linked to your previous work and potentially without the regulatory institution's affiliation, or directly related to your work as a regulatory institution. You know, I will say, for example, PCAOB, we have a huge conference every year. My division hosts it. We had it 2 weeks ago. We had 315 registrants, and you know, it was all dedicated towards the integration between academia and, you know, the PCAOB and the regulatory institutions. And we had panels with 2 to 3 academic presenters presenting their academic research. We had discussants and moderators from PCAOB. So we tried to bring that collaboration out also into the broader arena.
Laura, anything to add?
Yeah, so back to the question about like visibility of economists within FINRA and how important the work is. I will say economists are a critical part of what FINRA does. The Office of the Chief Economist is one level below the Chief Executive Officer, the CEO, Robert Cook. Our economists get a ton of visibility. Our work directly impacts policy work. And just a really quick example, FINRA has spent years and years, decades, trying to figure out how to identify and punish brokers and firms that have consistent bad behavior. It's been very, very difficult to get something through. And it was through the work of our economists and analysts providing a data evidence-driven approach. We actually got a high-risk broker and a high-risk firm rule through the process and are now moving forward with it. And it would not have been done without the economists on our team.
Great. Okay, so we have 1 minute left. There's a couple of questions about eligibility for working in your organization. So lightning round responses, starting with Chia. Do you have to be a US citizen? Do you hire permanent residents or foreign nationals at the SEC?
We used to be able to hire foreign nationals and we no longer can. So US citizenship is now a requirement.
Okay, what about permanent residents, green card holders? Are they eligible for any position?
Potentially eligible for the IPA position, but it is not completely clear.
Okay, so things change, but if you're an academic who wants to visit the SEC and you're a permanent resident, you may be eligible. Nayantara?
Yes, US citizen, but also a permanent resident, green card holder. Those will work as well.
Okay, Lori?
We don't really, we prefer green card. But we have staff with, you know, working towards green card, HB1.
Okay, great. Shannon, I don't know if you can answer that question, given you're a visiting scholar there.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I would guess that on the link to apply, it should provide more information about that. And if not, I welcome anyone to follow up with me via email and I can ask the right people for you.
Okay, great. We ran out of time. We didn't get to answer all the questions. There's a lot of them, but we really thank you for all of your input, and want a big thanks for the panelists for describing their organizations and the role of economists and accountants therein. So again, thank you all for showing up and participating. The next panel will come up separately to a new event. Be back in 15 minutes.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks.